Are public schools helping send black kids, young black kids, to prison? The answer is yes. And if you're not intentional and involved, your child could be next. Hang out with me for a few minutes and I'll explain what I'm talking about. Hello, everybody. This is Attorney Augustus Corbett, a.k.a. the Minister of Justice. I'm one half of the Defiant Lawyers, and each and every week we bring you at least one legal analysis of some story trending regarding politics, policies, personalities, or pop culture to help you defy an unjust legal system and to nullify systemic racism. If that interests you, if that is what you're dealing with and want to know more about how to deal with that, go ahead and subscribe, share, comment, and click the bell. And you will be added to our community where we are again empowering the African American community. All right, so what we're going to talk about today for a few minutes here is what many call the school to prison pipeline. The school to prison pipeline. And so that's why the question is, are public schools helping send black kids to prison? The answer is yes. And I know for three reasons at least. First, I'm a high school dropout. I dropped out in the 10th grade. But for the grace of God, I would have ended up dead. Also, in my community, a whole lot of the young black guys that I grew up with did not graduate high school just like myself. I got a GED. That's what I did. I got a GED, and I, by God's grace, went to college and eventually to law school. I'm an exception in the sense that a lot of young black men who had the issues I had as a teenager didn't make it through. And in fact, I had two younger brothers who were also high school dropouts, and they were killed in the streets. So I know about this issue on a personal level. So number one, I'm a high school dropout, and that put me on the trike, on the pipeline, if you will, to prison. Also, as an attorney, I have represented many young black juveniles and many adult black men. I won't say all, but many of them were high school dropouts. So I know a thing or two about this. And also, I was a public school teacher. So I've been inside the school system, and I know how it treats young black men, especially black kids generally. And that's what I want to talk to you about, because if you're not intentional with this, ladies and gentlemen, if you're raising black kids, if you're not very intentional, very involved, your kid really could be next, especially if it's a black male kid that you're raising. So that's my warning to you. And so I'm going to give you some information that can help you try to stop what is happening to a whole lot of young black kids in public schools. All right, so let's go to another screen. All right, so again, this is the school to prison pipeline, protecting black children from public schools of all things. But the protection is very much needed. All right, so let's begin with what is the school to prison pipeline. I define the school to prison pipeline as the inequitable and disparate treatment of black students, particularly black males, in the public education system that often leads to their marginalization and entanglement in the criminal justice system. Basically, what that means is the public school system treats our children unfair and that unfairness caused many of them to end up feeling unwelcome and unwanted, and many of them therefore drop out, just like I did. And when they drop out, again, just like I did, they end up in the streets. And the streets can eat them up, literally eat them up and spit them out in the criminal justice system. And a lot of parents don't even realize what is going on. Why is my kid not interested in school? Why does my kid hate school? Why does my kid not want to be in school? Why has my child lost interest in school? There could be some things that are happening or not happening in the home. So the child's home, first and foremost, may not be conducive to academic excellence. But I like to think that's not an excuse for educators to give up on a kid. When I was an educator, I could not change my students' homes. That was not under my control. But what was under my control is what happened in my classroom. And so I like to think that a teacher's classroom can be somewhat like a sanctuary, especially for kids who are having a rough time at home, who are not getting the type of support that they need from their parents to excel in school. So educators should not use a child's home as an excuse to fail that child. And by fail, not just in grades, but generally, academically fail that child. That means having low expectations for the child. That means just treating the child like he or she is not important, treating the child like you don't want them in the classroom, like they are a disturbance. In fact, there may be a disturbance. They may be disturbing the class. But there are ways that teachers can show that love and that concern for these kids and make education interesting such that the kids will not want to drop out or misbehave in the class. I know that personally. I'm going to share a story with you in a moment that will demonstrate that. So I drew a little diagram here to show you what that looks like. So what you see here is a school at the top of the screen. And then you see a bunch of young black males that are on a pipeline. And where does that pipeline lead? To jail. Do you see that? I drew that just so that you would have a pictorial of what the school to prison pipeline is all about. I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago. And when I talk about these issues, I talk about these issues from the perspective of black males because they're being impacted disproportionately. Young black females are also experiencing this type of disparate, inequitable treatment, but not to the level of young black males. So I focus my attention on young black men. As a matter of fact, this would be a good time to introduce you to a book that I wrote. This is how serious I take this subject. My book is entitled Education Injustice: How Public Schools Fail African American Males. All right. This book is available through Amazon. It's also available through my website, In Part Publishing. Get your copy, especially if you have young children in the school system and they are African American. You need this book. You need this book. All right. Now, some of the things that I cover in my book that are totally on point, I cover the achievement gap in black boys. So some of you may say, what is the achievement gap? The achievement gap is the gap that has existed between the standardized test scores of white kids and black kids in major subjects like science and math. When you look at those test scores, those end of the year test scores, African American children have scores that are roughly 25 to 35 points lower than white kids. And it's been that way for about 40 years. And so that is the first indicator That's a dashboard that we can look at to see that the public school system is not educating black kids the way it should. It's called the achievement gap. Also, I talk about wholesome homes. I do talk about what we can do at home. I talk about the home as being the foundation for strong academic performance. And I share some of the things that my wife and I did with our kids when they were in grade school. That worked out pretty well. Things turned out pretty well. I also talked about the importance of teachers. I cannot stress enough how important it is to get your kids in classrooms with great teachers. A teacher can almost cripple your child academically, a poor teacher. And what you don't probably know is in communities where there is a higher percentage of black kids, especially if they're black and underprivileged, school districts tend to assign the least qualified teachers to those school districts. That's why when my wife and I, when our kids were younger and we were relocating for whatever reason, the first consideration for us was whether or not the school system was a good school system. That was top consideration. And part of that was because we wanted our kids in classrooms with great teachers. So I talk about teaching and how teaching impact black kids. By the way, if you are a black male with a college degree, man, I strongly encourage you to become a black teacher. All right, so I also talk about how to help black boys value education, how to help young black males value education. I also talk about tracking. What is that? That's where your school's guidance counselor is putting your kid in classes and on a track, on an academic track that typically does not lead to college. It typically leads to trades, trade school, and so on, which are fine. I am not throwing any shade at trades and trade school. And in fact, I believe every young man should have a trade in addition to having a career and a college degree. No question. But there are some young men who should not be tracked to trade school because that young man is brilliant. That young man can do very well in a college environment. But because that young man or young woman is an African American, he or she is being tracked into a lower level class or classes, if you understand what I'm saying. So tracking also is a huge issue where black kids are concerned. School discipline. I'm going to put up some information in a moment that will show you how important school discipline is for black boys and how it is oftentimes used to kick black kids out of school or to push them out of school. Special education in black boys. More of our kids are placed in special education, many times not because they should be there, but because perhaps of their behavior. They're put in those special education classes when they don't need it. Now, mind you, when a kid needs special education, that can help that kid greatly because that kid will get specialized education through what's called an IEP. So when it's needed, it's great. When it's not needed, it can be awful. I also talk about the lack of black boys in the gifted and talented classes, as well as the AP classes. And finally, I talk about effective schools, and then I make some concluding statements in the book. So the book is well researched. It can absolutely help you be a strong advocate for your child. So I strongly encourage you to get a copy of the book. Now, let's go back to the slides that I created. So again, this is at the top of the screen, you see a school, and then you see two pipelines that are leading to prison. and they have young black males up there, although there are young black females as well who are on this school to prison pipeline, but the majority are young black males. All right, so I write up here the overrepresentation of black boys being expelled, suspended, tracked, placed in special education, and more causes the school to prison pipeline. That's how it gets started. Again, the overrepresentation of black boys being expelled, suspended. A lot of that expulsion and suspensions occur because of what's called zero tolerance policies. Policies that were developed about 40 years ago, and they are typically enforced mostly in African American school districts, and they have a greater impact on African American students. And they result, again, in expulsion, in suspension, and getting arrested, ending up in juvenile court or truancy court. They are enforced disproportionately against black kids. Again, they're called zero tolerance policies. And then on the other side of the screen, I talk about the underrepresentation of black boys in gifted and talented classes, AP classes, and college-bound classes also contributes to this pipeline. So let me give you a word of advice. Get your child in AP classes. Get your child in gifted and talented classes because they're going to be challenged more. Some of those credits can be used toward college. It's a secret black parents don't know about, that they should get their kids in those classes, in the AP classes. Be insistent about it. Be insistent at home that your kid does his or her best so that they can qualify for those classes, but also be insistent with the school district so they don't overlook your child or put your child again on that track that leads to the lower level academic classes. All right, so we talk about here on this slide that studies show teachers refer black students to the principal's office for discipline much more often than they refer white students, and 32% of the students whom principals suspend are black, though black students comprise only 17% of national student enrollment. So that is a disproportionate number. 32% of the students who are suspended are black, although black students only make up 17% of the national student enrollment. Now, some of you may say, yeah, that's because black kids misbehave more. No, it's not. That is not proven by studies. I was a teacher, and I did see a lot of young black males misbehaving, but I also saw a lot of young white males misbehaving. Let's keep it real. I think the misbehavior of young black kids are magnified more, but the studies, the data across the nation does not support the stereotype that black kids misbehave more. That does not justify the overrepresentation of black males who are getting suspended. All right, now let's go back over here to the slides that I made. Young brothers. So if you talk to these young men, they identify frequent suspensions and expulsions as a top reason why they decided to drop out of schools. Schools that frequently suspend black males often label those students troublemakers and steer them into low achievement classes. That's what the data tells us. I'm not making that up. That's coming straight out of my book. And I spent 2 years in the Duke University Law Library researching this book. I don't deal with anecdotes in this book. An anecdote is something that we personally experience or see, but it does not reflect what the national data says. And that's what we need to look at. The national data. And the national data does not support the stereotype that black males misbehave more often, more frequently than white kids, or that their misbehavior is more serious. It's not. Oftentimes, black kids end up in trouble because they come to school with dreads, with dreadlocks, or they come to school in baggy pants because they're bigger than some of the other kids. There are a bunch of reasons why black kids are unfairly targeted, and those reasons don't necessarily depend on the behavior of those kids. All of this is what makes up the school to prison pipeline. All of this that I'm walking you through now. Another slide says young students who are expelled or suspended are as much as 10 times more likely to drop out of high school, experience academic failure and grade retention, hold negative school attitudes, and face incarceration than those who are not. I can tell you from my personal experience how true that is. The assistant principal at my high school, he was an African American. He later apologized to me because he said that he just didn't give us young black males the type of support that we needed. Now, this was after I had gone to college and visited my old high school. This is what he told me. Mr. Herring was his name. I see his face now. And as a result of that, so many young black males in my community dropped out of high school, including me. I never made it past the 10th grade. I got a GED later. And a lot of it had to do with the fact, again, that the school system acted like it did not want us there. And because they treated us that way, we got the message, said, okay, I'm out. We got to change that. And you, as a parent, you got to make sure that does not happen to your kid. All right, removing students from the classroom has intensely adverse effects on their overall abilities to succeed throughout their academic careers. It breaks important connections to teachers, peers, and their learning environment, making reintegration extremely difficult. When I read this, I think about not only these things, but I also think about how the pandemic affected education for young black males and females. Our kids already deal with a myriad of issues in public schools. And then you add to this the pandemic over the last 3.5 years. Oh, the impact was just awful. And I think the last slide, do we have another one? No, this is the last slide. It says, black students do not misbehave at any higher rates than other students, yet black students are disciplined more frequently. That's what I just told you. Schools tend to track black students to non-college bound classes, whereas they track white and Asian kids to college bound classes. That again is tracking. It's insidious in that you don't readily see it, but it's happening in probably every public school where there are African American children. And again, parents, you got to be intentional about making sure your child is not being tracked that way. Now, I'll tell you one thing that happens. Our kids tend to excel athletically. And oftentimes the school puts our kids on a track to be athletes instead of scholars. I did not let that happen to my child, to Caleb, my son. No. The focus in our house was academics. He played basketball throughout high school, but I used his desire to play ball as the bait to get him to do well in school. until he matured and it kicked in for himself. So the rule was you got to score B's at a minimum in every class, preferably A's because you're an A student, but no less than a B in order for you to play basketball. Let me share a quick story with you about how the guidance counselor and the coaches changed my son's schedule after his mother, myself, and him sat down and we mapped out what classes he would take in his high school. Because, again, we wanted him to put together a great academic repertoire. We wanted him to have some strong classes, some strong grades, so that he can have a successful college education. And by the way, he told me his first year in college, he said, "Pops, thank you so much for doing that, because these first year freshman classes are so easy for me because of what I was already doing in my AP classes, or what he did in his AP classes his 11th and 12th years." See, that's why you got to push to get your child in those AP classes. Okay? So we use athletics to enhance his academic performance. You don't play basketball if you don't hit the books. The books come before basketball, period. No debate, no discussion. If you want to play basketball, at least B's. Of course, our kids need outlets, but we can use those outlets to get the kind of behavior that we know is going to benefit them in the long run. So, the school to prison pipeline is real. It's real. Get my book to learn more about it. I strongly encourage you to get a copy of the book. It doesn't cost much money if you have an iPad and read books on your iPad. I think it's only like $8, the price of a Happy Meal. If you want a hard copy like this, the price, I believe, is like $9, $10 maybe, $9.99. Again, the price of your favorite Starbucks coffee. And this can benefit your family in such a powerful way. So, folks, are schools helping send black kids to prison? Absolutely. I have represented maybe hundreds of juveniles and adults, mostly black kids and black men. And a lot of them, if not most of them, were high school dropouts, just like myself. And it's not that they are or were bad people necessarily. It wasn't that they were not intelligent young men necessarily. No, it was because of the way the public school system treats young black men. And if you, the parent, don't be very intentional about being your child's strongest advocate, the school system could be very well sending your child, putting your child on the path, the course, the pipeline to prison. All right, thank you for listening. Again, I am attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers, and we bring you this kind of content on a weekly basis. Again, to empower you to defy an unjust legal system and to nullify systemic racism. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your support. If you're not a subscriber, subscribe, share, comment, and click the bell. And again, go get a copy of my book, Education and Justice. Thank you for hanging out. Peace.